A small-town cop laughed in court as he accused a U.S. Army general of being aggressive, until the general made one quiet phone call that changed the entire room. It wasn't the kind of courtroom that saw many high-profile cases. The ceiling fans creaked as they spun, the air smelled faintly of mildew and coffee, and half the people in the gallery knew each other by name. It was the sort of place where folks settled parking disputes and noise complaints, not where a U.S. Army general stood trial. But on that Thursday morning in Covell County, Alabama, everything felt just a little off. The door opened. Reginald Voss walked in slow, deliberate steps, tall, shoulders straight, dressed in full Class A uniform. The polished brass on his chest reflected the overhead lights like it meant something, which it did. The room quieted, but not out of reverence. More like surprise and confusion. A man like that? Here? You could hear someone whisper behind the clerk's desk. "That's the guy?" Voss didn't acknowledge it. He kept walking until he stood behind the defense table. No lawyer at his side. Just him. Alone. Calm. Unbothered. At the prosecution's table, Officer Trent Dillard leaned back in his chair. Gum in his mouth, smug on his face. He turned to his lawyer and grinned. "I mean, look at him," he muttered, not even trying to lower his voice. "Trying to play soldier in here like it means something." The judge hadn't entered yet. People still moved around. Clerks, bailiffs, the local reporter from the Covell Tribune, who hadn't even brought his camera. No one expected a scene. They figured this would be quick. One man against a cop. In Covell, the cop usually won. Reginald Voss stood still, eyes forward, hands resting lightly on the table. And that uniform? It wasn't there to impress. It was a fact. A court bailiff finally approached him. Young guy. Looked nervous. "Sir, do you have an attorney representing you today?" Voss turned to him, didn't smile, didn't frown. Just answered like he was reading a time and date. "No, I'll speak for myself." The bailiff nodded and walked back, unsure of what to make of him. But across the room, Dillard was still chuckling, arms folded, confident in the air of small-town power. This wasn't just about law. It was about image. And Dillard knew how this place usually worked. Uniform or not, Voss was still a black man on trial in a southern courtroom, with no one sitting beside him. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The room rose more from routine than respect. "Be seated." Judge Penley was older, skin like paper, and glasses that slipped down his nose every few minutes. He shuffled through a manila folder, scanned the charges. "Obstruction, failure to comply, interfering with an officer during a lawful traffic stop." He looked up. "General Voss, I understand you wish to proceed without counsel." Voss nodded once. "That's correct, Your Honor." The judge looked over his glasses. Paused. "Very well." He turned to the prosecutor, a wiry man with thinning hair who began to read the arrest report aloud. The courtroom listened, and as he spoke, the words painted a picture of an irate man who wouldn't follow orders. A driver who grew belligerent and refused to exit the vehicle, escalating a routine stop into a dangerous standoff. But the man those words described didn't match the one standing silently at the defense table. And Dillard? He reclined slightly, bouncing one leg like he was already thinking about what to order for lunch after this was over. The report wrapped up. Judge Penley leaned forward. "General Voss, do you have any response to this account before we proceed?" Voss looked up, locked eyes with the judge. "I'd like to request a short recess. 5 minutes." The courtroom stirred. That wasn't standard. Judge Penley blinked. "Any particular reason?" Voss answered plainly. "I need to make a phone call." There was a pause. Just long enough for Dillard to snort and say under his breath, "Sure, go ahead and call your mom." Judge Penley didn't hear him. Or chose not to. He glanced at the bailiff, then back at Voss. "Granted. 5 minutes." Voss turned and walked slowly toward the courtroom exit. No rush. No panic. But something about the way he moved, deliberate, restrained, made people start to wonder. Maybe there was more to this man than they thought. But what happened after he made that call would wipe the smirk off Dillard's face permanently. Reginald Voss stepped into the narrow hallway outside the courtroom. The old door shut behind him with a muted thud. He didn't fumble for his phone, didn't pace. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a matte black device. Government-issued, with no logo, no branding, just purpose. He typed a number from memory. Waited. A voice picked up on the other end. "This is Major Baines. This is Voss. I need a field case review team deployed to Covell County Courthouse, Alabama. Immediate priority. Situation involves improper detainment and character defamation." No further explanation, just silence, followed by, "Understood. We're en route." Voss hung up, slid the phone back into his jacket. He looked through the small window in the door. The courtroom was still in session. The air inside had started to shift. No one knew what the call meant, but they'd know soon. Back inside, Officer Dillard was telling his version of the story. I told him to lower the window. He hesitated. Then he reached for something on the seat. So I stepped back, hand on my weapon, and ordered him out of the car. Dillard sat back, voice growing more confident with each sentence. He started talking about rights and not having to answer questions. Typical sovereign citizen behavior. I told him again, "Step out." He refused. Said he had clearance. I asked him to prove it. He wouldn't. The judge squinted. "Clearance?" "Yeah." Said he was on official military business, that I was interfering with national security or something. Sounded paranoid, honestly. The courtroom chuckled lightly. Dillard cracked another grin. Voss still hadn't spoken. The prosecutor cleared his throat and continued reading aloud from the police statement. Mr. Voss appeared increasingly agitated. When instructed to place his hands on the vehicle, he did not comply, and instead began asking the officer for his badge number in an aggressive tone. The officer attempted to restrain him, at which point the defendant pulled away and stated, quote, "You don't know who you're dealing with." More shuffling in the courtroom seats. People exchanging glances. The phrase, "You don't know who you're dealing with," hit the room like a cliché. Exactly the kind of line someone would use if they were trying to intimidate an officer, or trying to bluff. But General Voss didn't even blink. The judge raised an eyebrow. "General Voss, did you say that to Officer Dillard?" Voss's voice was smooth, controlled. "I did not." "You're saying the statement is fabricated?" "I'm saying I never raised my voice, never made a threat, and never used that phrase. If you had a recording, it would confirm that." Dillard jumped in. "Yeah, about that. Body cam malfunctioned. Battery issue. Dash cam. Also down that day. Maintenance backlog." The judge frowned. Convenient. Still, no one said anything. At least not out loud. In the gallery, a woman in a denim jacket whispered to the man next to her. "You really think he's just going to lie through all this?" The man shook his head slowly. "They better hope he doesn't have friends higher up." They didn't know how high. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Dillard, did Mr. Voss ever reach for a weapon?" "No, but I felt—" "So no weapon was drawn, no visible threat?" "No, but he refused lawful orders. That's the threat." The judge scribbled something down. Voss sat quietly, hands still folded. Not defensive, not angry, just waiting. The courtroom clerk glanced at her watch. 5 minutes had passed. The bailiff moved toward the back door just as it swung open. Voss re-entered the courtroom. And behind him, silence. For now. But the weight of what was about to enter that courtroom didn't come through the door with noise. It came with paperwork, federal protocol, and undeniable facts. Reginald Voss didn't need to announce anything as he walked back in. He didn't glance at Dillard, didn't acknowledge the murmurs bouncing between the wooden benches. He returned to his place at the defense table like nothing had happened. But something had. A few people in the back were already glancing toward the door. They couldn't explain why. Maybe instinct, maybe the shift in energy. Then the side door opened again. Not loudly, but with intent. 2 men walked in first. Both in suits, eyes alert, badges already visible. One carried a thick black folder. The other scanned the room as if measuring every reaction. Behind them, a third figure entered. Dark green uniform. Nameplate. Colonel Ira Wexley. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to war rooms and classified briefings, not wood-paneled courtrooms. They didn't go to the gallery. They walked straight to the judge's bench. The entire room fell into a hush so tight you could hear someone's pen drop. Judge Penley looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" The lead agent stepped forward and handed over a sealed envelope. "This is for your review, Your Honor. Priority-level documentation authorized for immediate court consideration under Title 10 jurisdiction." The judge blinked. I'm sorry. Under what authority are you operating?" Wexley spoke then. Calm. Direct. U.S. Army Office of General Counsel. I've been assigned to represent General Voss in a supervisory capacity as of 10 minutes ago. My credentials are inside that folder. Judge Penley hesitated, turned toward the prosecutor, who looked like he'd just swallowed a mouthful of sand. The folder was opened. Documents inside. Orders. Deployment logs, route authorizations, even satellite GPS markers with timestamps down to the second. Voss had been traveling under direct military assignment from Fort Polk to an off-site briefing center in Birmingham when the stop occurred. The judge's eyes moved slowly across the page. The entire timeline of the traffic stop didn't just have holes, it was unraveling in real time. Still, no shouting, no spectacle, just facts. Dillard sat forward now, not smiling anymore, elbows on the table, jaw tense. Voss hadn't said a word. Colonel Wexley addressed the court. "We are not here to disrupt proceedings. However, the documents provided include verified reports of misconduct tied to this arrest. It includes prior complaints against Officer Dillard, several of which were resolved quietly. We believe a pattern may exist." The prosecutor stood. "This is highly irregular. These materials weren't filed ahead of time. We haven't had a chance to review any of this." The judge removed his glasses. "Well, seems to me you've had 2 weeks to review your own officer's history. Yet somehow this wasn't in the packet." No reply. The tension in the courtroom thickened. Dillard shifted in his seat. The judge looked back toward Voss. "General, would you like to formally speak on your own behalf now?" Voss stood, smoothed his jacket. "I will." He stepped forward, slow, steady. "I was pulled over on a 2-lane highway just outside of Pine Grove. I provided my military credentials, in full view. I explained that I was en route to a classified meeting, and my route had been cleared by the Department of Defense. I was not speeding. My vehicle was registered and insured. I was calm, respectful. I asked the officer why I was being stopped." He paused. Officer Dillard became aggressive the moment he saw my uniform. He accused me of lying about my orders, then ordered me out of the vehicle without reason. When I asked for clarification, he reached for his cuffs. I did not resist. I asked for his badge number. He ignored me. When he restrained me, he told me I should know better than to act above the law. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. But I wasn't above the law. I followed every rule. He returned to his seat. No fanfare. Just truth. Judge Penley turned to the prosecutor. "Do you wish to continue with this case in light of the new evidence?" The prosecutor hesitated. "We request a brief recess to review." "You've had enough recesses." "Denied." Judge Penley folded the folder closed and exhaled through his nose. "Proceeding continues." But from here on out, Officer Dillard wouldn't be the one driving the narrative. He'd be trying to stop it from crashing. Most people in that courtroom had no idea who Reginald Voss was beyond what they saw. A man in uniform. Quiet. Black. Alone. But the documents Judge Penley now held in his hands told a very different story. Reginald Voss wasn't just another name in the chain of command. He'd led over a dozen international deployments, spent time embedded with NATO peacekeeping operations in the Balkans, managed high-risk evacuation corridors during the first withdrawal from Kandahar. He had multiple clearance levels and had once been flown overnight to meet with cabinet-level officials after a hostage rescue plan he developed saved 5 Americans in Sudan. In his jacket pocket right now, he carried a Defense Superior Service Medal. Not to wear, just to remind himself that recognition only mattered if you stayed grounded. He'd started his military career as an ROTC recruit from a small college in Arkansas, worked his way up without shortcuts. He never played politics, and he didn't chase headlines. He wasn't the man people wrote books about, but he was the man other leaders called when things were falling apart. And yet, there he was, sitting in a courthouse that smelled like old linoleum and air freshener, being talked about like he was reckless, dangerous, defiant. The irony wasn't lost on him. His career had taught him plenty about threats. But the real danger? It was never the loud ones. It was the quiet erasures, the subtle rewordings, the moments when people in power twisted truth into something that fit easier on a police report. Dillard's version of events was already coming apart, but Voss knew better than to celebrate. That wasn't his way. Real accountability rarely walked in the front door. It came in slow, through years of documentation, testimony, and undeniable patterns. From the gallery, a man whispered, "You think he pulled strings to get those agents here?" Another woman replied softly, "Nah, I think he just made one call," and that was true. Voss hadn't called in favors. He'd simply reported what happened through the proper channel, and that channel responded, not because of who he was, but because of what was right. Back at the bench, Judge Penley flipped through more of the folder. Each page added new layers. Voss's service record, performance evaluations, personal commendations from generals, secretaries, even a past vice president. But the most damning were the GPS logs, time-stamped to the minute. They proved that Voss had been traveling a verified route authorized by the Department of the Army. His vehicle had never veered off track, never sped, never made a sudden stop. And Dillard's claim that Voss acted erratic? The GPS record showed Voss pulled over promptly and remained parked for 12 straight minutes. There was no movement until the moment Dillard placed him in the back of the cruiser. That's when Penley finally asked the question. "Officer Dillard, if the vehicle was parked for 12 minutes, why did you say Mr. Voss resisted arrest?" Dillard adjusted his collar. "Because he wouldn't comply. He kept arguing, or asking questions." Dillard paused. It felt aggressive. Penley set his pen down. "Feeling something doesn't make it true." In the back, Colonel Wexley crossed his arms. Still silent. Still watching. The courtroom had shifted. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about something larger. It was about what people assume when they see someone standing alone, especially someone they don't understand. It was about what gets rewritten when someone doesn't fit the mold of what power expects. And it was about a man who had spent a lifetime following the rules, only to be accused of breaking them for simply existing in a space someone thought he didn't belong. But Voss wasn't shrinking. He never had. And as more truth came to light, the room that once dismissed him began to sit a little straighter. The tone in the room had shifted like air before a storm. You couldn't quite name it, but you could feel it. Something about the way Officer Trent Dillard now tapped his pen against the table. How his lawyer no longer leaned back with ease. Judge Penley glanced back down at the file Colonel Wexley had delivered. He picked up a stapled set of pages marked Internal Review Summaries. Dillard. T. His eyes scanned for a moment before he raised a single brow and looked up again. "Officer Dillard," the judge began. "Do you recall a civilian complaint filed in August of last year involving a 17-year-old named Kelvin Rourke?" Dillard blinked. Not specifically, Your Honor. We get a lot of reports in this line of work." "That one involved an unlawful search during a traffic stop. No warrant, no probable cause. The department settled it quietly. Know anything about that?" Dillard shifted. "That was handled by my supervisor. I wasn't reprimanded." Penley nodded slowly. "How about May of the year before that? Elderly woman. Stopped on her way home from church. Said you threatened to tow her car if she didn't step out faster. Her son filed the complaint." Dillard cleared his throat. "I remember that one. She was parked illegally." Penley raised the document in the air slightly. "She was in a grocery store lot, waiting on her granddaughter. Not on the road, not obstructing traffic." There was no more gum chewing from Dillard now. The courtroom was quiet again. But this time it wasn't boredom. It was attention. The kind that comes when people realize a thread is being pulled, and the entire thing might come apart. Judge Penley went on, voice more clipped now. "You've had 5 civilian complaints in the past 2 years. 4 were settled quietly. 1 was dismissed on a technicality. None of them made it into this court's filing packet." The prosecutor's face turned red. "Your Honor, we didn't believe those were relevant to the current case." "Then you weren't looking hard enough." He turned toward the jury box, which sat empty. This wasn't a jury trial, but the gesture wasn't accidental. It was a signal to the room. People were paying attention now. Dillard was no longer just a cop doing his job. He was a man under a spotlight. Voss remained still. Same posture. Same quiet composure. Penley turned back to him. "General Voss, did Officer Dillard mention his reason for stopping you?" Voss nodded once. "He said I didn't signal at a turn." "There was no turn," Penley sighed, long and heavy. "Of course there wasn't." He looked toward Colonel Wexley. "Colonel, you mentioned your office ran a preliminary review. Did you find anything else?" Wexley stepped forward and placed a second folder on the bench. "Bodycam from another officer who arrived late to the scene. He didn't intervene, but his camera captured part of the interaction, including Mr. Voss asking for a badge number 3 separate times and being ignored. The footage also shows Mr. Voss standing with both hands visible at all times." Dillard paled. "Objection!" his lawyer shouted. "That footage wasn't shared with us. This is a surprise submission." Judge Penley didn't blink. "You objecting to evidence your client never told you existed?" The lawyer backed down fast. The judge looked back at Dillard. "Why wasn't that mentioned? Why wasn't that footage included?" Dillard looked down. "I didn't know the other officer had his camera on." "You didn't ask?" No answer. The pieces were coming together, and not in Dillard's favor. He'd assumed this would go the way things usually did, that no one would question a few exaggerated lines in a report, that no one would challenge the word of a cop in Covell County. But this wasn't a usual case, and Voss wasn't a usual man. And now, the courtroom wasn't just listening. It was watching, judging. Not Voss, but Dillard. And with every page the judge turned, the ground under Dillard's feet cracked a little more. By now, Officer Dillard sat perfectly still. No leg bouncing, no gum, no whispers to his attorney, just a quiet kind of panic settling behind his eyes. Judge Penley adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly, steepling his fingers. "Let's go back to the stop itself. Officer Dillard, you claimed the defendant resisted, that he refused to comply with your commands. But now we have footage, limited but sufficient, that shows him asking for your badge number calmly and standing with both hands visible. Can you explain the contradiction?" Dillard didn't answer right away. His lawyer nudged him gently. I must have remembered it differently. I felt the situation was escalating." Penley tilted his head. "Or you escalated it? There's a difference." Voss didn't move, but you could feel the weight of his presence. He wasn't pushing for anything, just letting the truth walk its own path. The judge turned to the prosecutor. "Do you wish to proceed? Or are you ready to concede? This case has no legs left." The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it. He shuffled some papers, stalling. Colonel Wexley stepped forward again. "Your Honor, if I may, we'd like to formally submit a summary of Mr. Voss's official orders, verified en route time logs, and clearance level. The arrest delayed a briefing involving national-level intelligence. It resulted in a lost security window that required rescheduling, at cost to operational logistics." The courtroom absorbed that quietly. This wasn't just a legal matter now. It was a federal one. Penley took the folder without a word. He flipped through it carefully, nodding once or twice as he read. Then he set it aside and turned his gaze back to Voss. "General, how long have you served in the military?" 42 years, sir." "Have you ever been arrested prior to this incident?" "No." "Ever had a complaint filed against you for misconduct?" "No, sir." "Do you believe you were targeted by Officer Dillard?" Voss paused, not for drama, but precision. "I believe he saw my face before he saw my badge." That line didn't stir applause. It didn't have to. It simply sat there, real, heavy, and undeniable. Dillard looked down at the floor. In the gallery, you could feel people rethinking things. Some had walked in expecting a simple hearing about a man who didn't follow orders. Now they were staring at a veteran who had followed every order his country gave him, only to be stopped and accused because someone couldn't see past a uniform, or didn't care to. Judge Penley rubbed his temples. I've been on this bench for 23 years. I've seen every kind of case. Fraud, assault, theft. But I've rarely seen one that made me question the integrity of this courtroom's foundation the way this has. He turned to Dillard, whose hands were now gripping the edge of the table. You're not just under review. Effective immediately, your conduct is being referred to the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation for procedural misconduct and false reporting. Any badge loses its meaning if the man behind it abuses it. Dillard didn't protest. He couldn't. His attorney leaned in, whispering something. Dillard gave a slow nod. Penley turned back to Voss. General, I don't think words can make up for what's happened here today, but I hope action will. Voss stood. Your Honor, I didn't come for punishment. I came for truth. The judge looked at him, long and thoughtful. You got it. He raised his gavel. Charges against Reginald Voss. Dismissed with prejudice. Case closed. The gavel came down. It was quiet afterward. Not out of shock, not even relief. Just understanding. The kind that settles when something false is finally called out for what it is. But the real shift hadn't happened on the bench. It was happening in the eyes of the people watching. The courtroom emptied slowly. Not because anyone was told to stay, but because people didn't know how to leave. They sat there with their arms crossed, their eyes darting toward Officer Dillard, then back to General Voss, as if they were still trying to piece together what they'd just seen. Dillard remained seated, shoulders slouched, jaw clenched. His badge had been quietly removed by the bailiff. His gun had already been taken before the hearing. All standard procedure once an internal referral is triggered. But the look on his face, it wasn't fear. It was disbelief. Like he'd just realized that this time, there was no one coming to clean it up for him. Voss stepped back from the table. As he did, the silence stretched again. He turned to Colonel Wexley, who gave him a small, respectful nod. No handshake, no performance. Just acknowledgement between two men who had spent their lives in systems where mistakes cost more than time. They cost lives. Then, for the first time that day, Voss addressed Dillard directly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get close. He simply said, When someone asks you for your badge number, it's not a threat. It's a right. You thought I was trying to provoke you, but I was protecting myself. Dillard didn't respond. Voss continued. I've been in war zones where people spoke 10 different languages and still found a way to respect each other. You couldn't manage that in your own country. Dillard looked away. There was nothing left to say. Voss walked toward the door, and as he passed by the gallery, a woman, middle-aged, grey hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, spoke up. General Voss, I'm sorry this happened here. He stopped. Met her eyes. You didn't do this, but we let it happen. He gave a small shake of the head. Letting something happen once doesn't define you. Letting it happen twice does. She swallowed hard and sat back down. Outside, the air felt different. Sunlight on pavement, cars rolling past on the main street. Life was still going on, but something in the town's rhythm had been disrupted. Two young men stood near a bench, watching Voss walk by. One of them, probably no older than 20, whispered to the other, I never seen anything like that, man. Thought they were going to throw him in jail. His friend replied, Dude made one call and the whole thing flipped. No, the first one said. He didn't flip it. He just let the truth speak for itself. Inside the courthouse, Dillard remained frozen. His lawyer packed up quietly, avoiding eye contact. The prosecutor busied himself with meaningless notes, and the judge stayed seated for a long time, staring at nothing in particular, as if running through every time he'd accepted a police report without asking more questions. There was no press conference, no statement to the news. Voss wasn't interested in any of that. He didn't walk outside to applause or headlines. He just walked to his car. But as he opened the door, he noticed a teenager standing near the sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder, phone in hand, recording. Sir? The teen asked, hesitating. Yes? I just want to say, thanks for standing up. Not many people would have handled that the way you did. Voss smiled gently. Not for show, just for him. Most people would. They just haven't had to yet. Then he got in the car, shut the door, and sat quietly for a moment. But the silence this time wasn't heavy. It was earned. Because the illusion had cracked, and what was left behind was something far more lasting. By late afternoon, word had spread far beyond Koval County. It started with a tweet, a blurry photo of General Voss walking out of the courthouse, posted by a high school student who'd been tagging along with her mother during jury duty. The caption read, "Guy in truthful uniform just got wrongfully arrested by Koval police. Made one phone call, and then the room flipped." Wild. Within 2 hours, it had been reposted by a regional journalist in Birmingham. Then came the Facebook posts, the grainy screenshots, the rushed cell phone videos showing federal agents walking into a small Alabama courthouse with thick files and unreadable faces. Local media outlets picked up the scent fast, then regional ones. By evening, it was headline news on 2 stations across Alabama and Mississippi. And with every repost, every retelling, the disbelief grew louder. Why was a high-ranking army officer arrested on a back road in the first place? How do you mess up a stop this badly and still have the nerve to laugh in court? There's no dash cam, no body cam, 5 complaints already. Koval's city clerk's office phone didn't stop ringing. The mayor gave a half-hearted statement about procedural integrity. The police department declined to comment, citing an ongoing internal review. But people weren't waiting for explanations anymore. They were talking, and they weren't being quiet about it. Even in Koval itself, the conversations had changed. At Shaw's Diner on Mill Street, an older man sitting at the counter stirred his coffee, watching the news on a dusty TV mounted near the pie display. "That boy made a fool of himself," he muttered. The waitress, drying glasses behind the bar, didn't look up. "No, that boy's been making a fool of himself for years, just finally got caught." 3 booths down, a woman opened her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping from 2 years ago, a short piece about a traffic stop that had ended with a high schooler crying on the side of the road and no charges filed. The name T. Dillard was buried in the fine print. Back then, no one had said much. But now everyone was listening. At the high school football field, parents stood in small clusters during practice, murmuring while watching their kids run drills. One of them, a former MP, shook his head. "Never seen a man carry himself like that. Didn't even flinch." His friend replied, "Didn't need to. He knew what he had behind him." Back at Fort Polk, a few officers pulled up the case summary through internal channels. One sergeant printed it out and pinned it to a bulletin board under a headline someone scribbled in Sharpie, "Know your rights, even when they pretend you don't have any." Meanwhile, Officer Dillard's name had started trending online, not for heroism, not for sacrifice, but for arrogance. And the cracks in his record? They weren't rumors anymore. Screenshots of the old complaints, redacted statements, the settlements. They all made their way online, stitched together by people who'd never met Voss, but recognized something they'd seen too many times before. It wasn't just about one man in one courtroom. It was about how fast someone could be labeled a problem, even after 4 decades of service. About how fragile truth becomes when it's forced to compete with ego. And it was about how power, unchecked, turns lazy. That evening, Colonel Wexley made a quiet call to confirm that General Voss had returned safely to base. "He's fine," came the reply. "Says he's just catching up on emails." Of course he was. No press tour, no interviews, just back to work. And maybe that's why people connected with the story even more, because Voss didn't grandstand. He didn't need the world to clap for him. He just needed the truth to land where it belonged. But what none of them could see from outside the courtroom was that Voss wasn't finished. He still had one more thing to say, and it wouldn't be loud. It would be lasting. 2 days later, the Koval County Courthouse released an official statement. Brief. Cold. Clearly drafted by someone who didn't want to say much. The charges against General Reginald Voss were reviewed and dismissed, The matter regarding Officer Trent Dillard has been referred to the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation for further inquiry. We will provide no additional comment at this time." That was it. No apology, no admission of error, no mention of the body cam footage or the missing dash cam. Just a bureaucratic bow to pressure. But by then, the verdict had already echoed far beyond the courthouse walls. General Voss was back at Fort Polk, sitting at his desk like nothing had happened. He didn't hang up the court documents, didn't even keep a copy. What mattered to him was that the truth stood on its own. He'd seen enough men lose themselves chasing retribution. That wasn't the goal. Still, a handwritten letter arrived that afternoon. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "I watched everything. I believed him at first. I won't lie. I thought you were just another man trying to talk above your station. I was wrong. I'm sorry." No signature. Just that. Voss folded it once and slid it into a drawer. He didn't need names. The words were enough. Meanwhile, Dillard had been placed on administrative leave. No badge. No patrol. His department email deactivated. News vans parked outside his street for 2 nights before giving up. He stayed inside, blinds drawn. The same town that once stood behind him was now quiet, distant, unsure what to do with the man they'd defended out of habit. His lawyer issued a statement, the usual routine. "My client maintains that he followed protocol to the best of his knowledge. He looks forward to clearing his name through the appropriate channels." But no one was really listening anymore. Public opinion had moved on, not out of boredom, but resolution. The truth had been aired out in front of them, page by page, and the verdict wasn't just legal. It was personal. Everyone watching had seen what happened when someone like Voss chose to walk in silent, knowing who he was, refusing to be baited. He never raised his voice, never asked for pity. He just stood his ground with clarity. In Covell, people talked less now, at least about him. You could hear his name at barbershops, churches, grocery store lines, but not with mockery, with reflection, quiet reflection. At the town library, a history teacher asked a group of students, "Why do you think the general didn't bring a lawyer?" One boy raised his hand. "Because he wanted them to hear him, not someone explaining for him." She nodded. And that was the legacy. Not the courtroom victory, not the folders full of evidence, but that someone saw injustice and didn't bark. He didn't throw fists or threaten lawsuits. He simply walked into a system stacked against him and let the system expose itself. Later that week, Judge Penley was seen walking to his car after hours. A reporter stopped him, recorder already running. "Judge, anything you'd like to say about the Voss case?" Penley paused, looked down for a moment, as if picking the right words. Sometimes the truth shows up dressed in silence, and it sits still until the room's forced to stop talking. Then he got in his car and drove off. Inside his truck, Voss had a small folder of photos. Not war photos, not medals, just snapshots of his kids, his wife, old friends he'd served with. On top of them was a picture of his father in uniform, taken sometime in 1967. That man had seen worse. That man never got the apology. Voss didn't need it either. But this generation would remember, not because of headlines, but because the story made it impossible to forget. 2 weeks later, Reginald Voss sat on his porch just outside Leesville, Louisiana. It was a modest brick house, nothing fancy. A few neighbors waved as they walked past, but most just kept moving. The story had cooled off by then. The social media cycle had shifted to something louder, flashier. But Voss wasn't worried about headlines. He watched the sun dip low behind the treetops. A worn notebook rested in his lap, opened to a half-filled page. It wasn't a journal. He didn't keep one. Just a place where he sometimes wrote down ideas worth remembering. Across the page, he'd scribbled a line he'd once heard from a mentor. "Your silence only matters when you know what it protects." He stared at the words for a while. Most people hadn't understood why he didn't go on national television, why he didn't hold a press conference or sue the Covell Police Department or demand airtime from some primetime host eager for another viral moment. But that wasn't the point. The lesson wasn't in the noise, it was in the restraint. He didn't want people to remember how he won. He wanted them to remember why he never had to raise his voice to do it. Later that night, he received a video message from a former cadet. A young black officer, now stationed in North Dakota. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke. "Sir, I watched your hearing. I've dealt with the same thing more times than I want to admit. You made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Like I wasn't the only one being told to keep my head down. You made me feel seen." Voss didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. That message wasn't for backpatting. It was a marker. Proof that how you carry yourself matters, even when no one's clapping. At Fort Polk, word of what happened had become more than just barracks talk. Commanders pulled up the transcript during leadership briefings, not to highlight conflict, but to show what composure looks like when tested. How discipline isn't just about drills and dress codes, it's about posture when things turn sideways. One senior officer had put it plainly. "We don't teach people to fight every battle. We teach them how to choose which ones are worth standing through." Meanwhile, in Koval, things continued quietly. Officer Dillard's name was removed from the active roster. No official ruling had come down yet, but few believed he'd wear a badge again. A new training session was scheduled for the department: mandatory ethics, de-escalation, body cam compliance. Late, but necessary. In the courthouse, Judge Penley had ordered a procedural review of how civilian complaints were handled. And this time, he wasn't taking his clerk's summaries at face value. Little shifts, small movements, nothing grand, nothing flashy, but real. And Voss, he still woke at 5:30 every morning, still ran his usual 2 miles, still called his grandchildren every Sunday afternoon. But when people recognized him now, at the grocery store, in line at the post office, it wasn't because of medals or stories from overseas. It was because of how he stood in a place meant to intimidate and didn't waver. One day, a local college invited him to speak. Not about war, not about tactics, about leadership, about what to do when your silence is mistaken for weakness, and how to let truth do the work. He agreed. At the end of his talk, a student asked the final question. "What gave you the strength to keep calm when you knew they were lying?" Voss thought about it. Then he said, "I wasn't calm because I didn't feel anything. I was calm because I knew the moment I reacted how they expected, I'd lose the only weapon I had. My control." He closed the notebook, stood up from the stool, and left the room in silence. Because the truth had already been said. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you respect, or someone you've been, share it. Let others see that dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just walks in, stands still, and waits for the lies to fall apart. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button for more stories that don't just entertain, but speak.